People believe all sorts of different things about issues facing the world. But what do Christians believe about justice? We live in a world that is crying out for justice. Just think of how America has been rocked following the tragic killing of George Floyd, and at the hands of a police officer, one whose job it is to protect the public. So this raises a question: does God care about justice? And then at a personal level, perhaps you suffered terribly at the hands of someone. You've experienced systematic abuse of one kind or another, and yet this person has never stood trial for their crimes. And so this isn't a dry theoretical question, it's deeply personal. Does God care about justice? When you leave Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland, where over 1 million people, mainly Jews, were exterminated, there is a sign asking two haunting questions. Were the guilty ever brought to justice? And can those wrongs ever be addressed? One of the disturbing facts of the Holocaust is that so many of the perpetrators escaped justice. Those like Dr. Joseph Mengele, he was a Nazi physician who killed hundreds of children in grotesque medical experiments. And yet at the end of the war, he managed to escape to South America, where he lived a very comfortable and prosperous life. And then at the age of 67, he died of a heart attack whilst enjoying his daily swim. So were the guilty brought to justice? And can these wrongs ever be addressed? These words echo down through history. Does God care about justice? Is he committed to justice? Well, let me read to you from the New Testament book of Acts in chapter 17. The Apostle Paul is speaking before a crowd in Athens, and he declares, "For God has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead." Do you see what Paul is saying? The past historical certainty of a resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead guarantees the future certainty of judgment and justice. One day all will stand before the judgment seat of God. All must give an account. Nothing will be hidden. Everything will be revealed and laid bare. And because God sees every act of evil and wickedness, therefore every perpetrator will be held to account. No one will escape God's ultimate justice. And of course, God's justice, it's a sign of his goodness. We would be rightly appalled if God turned a blind eye to the Joseph Mengeles of this world and simply shrugged his shoulders with indifference. Wrongdoing matters to God. It provokes his pure and perfect anger. I know people who were abused by adults when they were children, abused by the very ones who should have been there to care for them. Some of the abusers died before their crimes came to light. If there is no God, there can be no ultimate justice, and so the abusers, well, they got away with it. But wonderfully, the Bible reveals that God is a just God. He will not leave the guilty unpunished. He will not tolerate evil and wickedness forever. Well, perhaps at this point you're thinking, well, I'm pleased there will be a day of justice for terrorists, for child abusers, for murderers. But surely God's not going to judge me. But that's where we have a problem. Because the reality of God's just judgment comes with a warning. In the Old Testament book of Habakkuk, we're given this description of God. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil, and you cannot tolerate wrongdoing. God's standards are perfect. Now, I think we view God's standards a little bit like doing the high jump at school. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, we like the bar to be set high enough so that certain people won't be able to clear it. Rapists, murderers, terrorists and the like. But we also want the bar of morality to be set low enough so that we can clear it, so that we'll be okay on the day of judgment. But because God is perfect, his standards are perfect. He'd cease to be perfect if he lowered the bar. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus sums up God's standards by saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. And love your neighbour as yourself. I might clear the bar if I set the height, but when God sets it, I fall way short. And so do we all. None of us can claim to have loved God and other people perfectly all of the time. And so we too stand guilty before God. We're not ready for the day of coming judgment and justice. But this is where the Christian faith offers such wonderful hope. Jesus Christ, the eternal Son of God, the only one ever to have loved God his Father and other people perfectly all of the time. And yet Jesus willingly and freely, out of the most amazing love, went to the cross and took upon himself our sin and our guilt. God's fierce anger at our sin came crashing down upon his shoulders. He experienced the judgment and the condemnation we deserve. Why? So that God's justice might be satisfied, and so we might be forgiven and be at peace with our Creator. Fast forward now to the end of time when we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. And yet for those who have sought refuge at the cross of Christ, the verdict is guaranteed. No condemnation. Now this is a huge topic and we've only just begun to scratch the surface, but let me suggest two ways you can take things further. Firstly, there's a great little book called If You Could Ask God One Question. You can download it for free, see the link below. And secondly, all of our services are currently online. We'd love you to join us. See the links below for our YouTube account and our website details. Does God care about justice? Well, the cross of Jesus Christ reveals how passionately God is committed both to justice for the guilty and mercy for the undeserving.